I'd like to thank all the panelists here today. We have Peter Varga from the MOL Group. He's the Chief Information Security Officer. He has a vast experience in the retail industry. We have Mirko Spagnolatti, Business Development Director at Ingenico Group, and also in the Executive Committee for IFSF, who do policy on global standards for payment and other systems. And we also have Neil Douglas, IT Consultancy Director for Network Roy, joining from Edinburgh, an expert in cybersecurity. One of the major issues in our industry today is that as stations become more connected and devices inside those stations are connected to IoT, we have vast quantities of information flowing and being stored in the cloud, as well as many different systems. We have the danger of possible attacks, and therefore today we want to explore how retailers and other fuel service businesses can ensure the safety of their sites. So let's start with Mr. Peter Varga. What do you see as some of the main challenges and areas of vulnerability for petrol stations when it comes to cybersecurity and protecting their business?
Well, I think you definitely mentioned one topic is the, at least for my company, petrol station, a new business line. Basically, apart from fuel, we are focusing lots on non-fuel and any other retail transactions. You know, it was not really usual before. It requires lots of new systems, lots of integration with internal and external systems. So, contrary to the past, when retail was definitely only in the, in their own within their own boundaries, now retail are connected to all aspects of the business, and even including external systems. So cloud services, very simple, even weather services or many other external sources of data are interconnected. One big data source. So integrity of that data, obviously a huge challenge. Also, the cyber threats themselves are getting much more sophisticated and much more focused, much more targeted. So there are targeted systems and also targeted companies. It's not just a random attacks, but basically attacking specifically on a special solution or even a targeted company.
Neil, what do you see as the main areas of what would a hacker look at to try and attack a petrol station, let's say, specifically?
There's a number of areas that are open to the attacker, depending on the facilities and the connectivity at the site. One of those could be public Wi-Fi, if there's any kind of public Wi-Fi functionality within the larger sites. As Peter has already mentioned, connectivity between different systems and integrations with other systems could lead to supply chain attacks. But I think you also have to look at the insider threat as well and see, is there a reason for your employees to be attacking your systems as well?
For example, Peter, you might have more experience on this. As we know, in February, Ingenico Group in Croatia, which is part of the MOL Group, suffered an attack. So what would they normally want, these hackers? What would retailers have to face in terms of issues once they've been attacked?
I mean, I think obviously most of the attacks nowadays are based on business, so they want money in any form that they can get it. So either they are hacking payment systems and taking credit card information and selling or using on dark web. Also, in a case, it was a ransomware attack. So basically, they tried to get ransom out of the systems, which they successfully, or they thought that successfully encrypted. So, it's in case of INA, it was obviously not specifically targeted to the retail station, but some of the retail stations were also affected by the attack. And there were different forms of attacks. We also got DDoS effect, which also could, because of the integration of the various systems, and also the petrol station are not anymore solo or independent systems. So they could be affected by even the target is not necessarily the petrol station, but because of the data, what they are receiving is on a central location. Central location is affected, obviously, petrol station. And for us, because we are maintaining lots of petrol stations, so we are talking about thousands of petrol stations, and even in INA case, hundreds of petrol stations in various countries. Obviously, the setup, if it's not standardized, it could be also difficult and a big challenge to find out which petrol station are affected and which is.
Yeah, that's fascinating insight. Thank you, Peter. Mirko, you have vast experience in the fuel retailing industry. You've been in the business for a long time. Do you think retailers are conscious of the dangers that are involved here, and do you think they're preparing appropriately?
Well, not completely, in my opinion, because as the colleagues already said before, especially Peter, we're now facing a unprecedented number of interconnected systems with very, very complex layers of integrations, which are interacting to various degree in the business processes that are supported by the petrol stations. And all this complexity is really difficult to manage. We're talking about distributed system, we're talking about different countries, different business models, networks which are completely under control because of company-owned sites, but also partner networks or third party, under which we don't have at the right level of authority, so to say, to impose the same policy level we have on company-owned sites. And then on top of it, the area that I'm most focused on is the payment, which is payment security is an additional topic by itself, because in addition to all the general IT security topics that we can discuss for any business, the payment data are always been extremely valuable information for attackers. And so there are increasing efforts from these attackers to get this data available for their businesses. So.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And so obviously, when it comes down to payments as well as systems, do the three of you, do you feel there's enough unity and support amongst countries? Three of you operate in the European Union, for example. Do you think there's an appropriate legal frame there, or do you think more should be done from the public spheres? You can go, Mirko, if you want first.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that at least again on my area, which is payment, the frameworks that we have available in Europe are very, very sophisticated, very mature, and we are better positioned than other parts in the world. Just to mention, in the US, for example, the transition of EMV acceptance, which is chip card acceptance at the pump, is still to happen. They postponed the date for a number of times and it's still not there. And as we know, there are a number of sophisticated high-profile skimming attacks on the pump because with this legacy extract technology, it's relatively easy to have access to cardholder data by attacking the fuel pump. In Europe, situation is better because the transition to chip cards and EMV happened years ago. So at the moment, the level of attack that can be done against bank card acceptance in Europe is extremely limited. On the other hand, we still have a number of payment methods like fuel cards or proprietary local accounts and so on, which are not as secure, and they are becoming increasingly important sources of attack. Mm-hmm. So skimming definitely is an area where we should put more focus on, definitely.
Yeah, Peter, would you like to add anything to that from your perspective as a...
Yeah, I would join to that, basically, that, I think that I would say traditional card payments are now mature enough and secure enough. But obviously, the huge business demand for various new ways to to pay, or even pay less, basically, or seamless payments when you even don't swipe any card or don't use anything, basically, but your card plates or your mobile or both together to identify you and do the payments. There are lots of various new ideas in the business, which in one hand obviously serve the customer needs for seamless payment and fast service, but obviously in other hand is a huge challenge from cybersecurity point of view, because finding the way to threat those systems are obviously unknown, or it's not built into the business model, obvious, and the attackers are very creative, so they can easily find solution if you might not really thought through during the planning of the business model. So that's obviously a big challenge for cybersecurity group.
Yeah, because I guess in this case, like with many things that happen, the technological advancement many times happens before the regulation is done. So a lot of retailers are implementing new methods where maybe the safety measures are still not in place, or we're still not fully aware of the dangers. So Neil, I want to go back to you. So from your perspective as an IT provider and company, what does a retailer need to do to make sure the site is as safe as possible?
I think we need to come back to the basics. It's something that we in the industry say a lot, that we're not getting right and we're not getting the basics right, but that's the state of affairs at the moment. So if we take your average retail site, they probably don't know what IT kit they've got. It may not be up to date, it may not be standardized across each of their sites. And before they can begin to protect that site, they need to know what they have, both in terms of physical equipment and their information assets as well. Once you know that, then you can start doing a risk assessment and put a risk management process in place. But if you don't do that, then you're really leaving yourself open to attack.
Mm-hmm. Do you see, Neil, from your experience, I know Network Roy is starting to get into the retail sector. Do you think that most people involved in the business are conscious of the dangers, or do you think there's still a lot of education to be done in that sense?
There's definitely a lot of education to be done. Business people are not cyber people. And although cyber meets business, the further up the chain that you go, obviously, it's down to people like me, like Peter and Mirko that work in the industry to educate those business people on the risks that are out there. And I think if you're a business person watching this and you want to get on top of your cybersecurity, then you need to be speaking to someone who knows about cyber so that you can do that risk assessment correctly.
So one question for the three of you, which now happens with most conversations, is: has COVID-19 and the pandemic affected this in any way? Have we seen an increase of cyber attacks? Obviously, from the payment sector, there is more digital payments happening and contactless payments as that's encouraged. So do you see any major changes throughout this pandemic when it comes to cybersecurity? Peter, if you want to go.
So definitely, I think the COVID as a topic, which, when it's a topic with fear, obviously it's open up gates through people. Basically, that's what we've seen, and that's what attackers are definitely using as a topic. So in our case, we definitely, realize that this topic is being used for phishing attacks, for websites, even targeted phishing attacks were specifically designed using topic to MOL Group. So we saw this as in any form, and I think that's obviously one aspect of the whole story, but also in cybersecurity, also COVID brings completely new challenges. So simply just, one specific case, people who maintain the systems, because there is no connection, for instance, to the system, they have to travel there and do the update. It's COVID brought a big challenge for that because it was not allowed. So, those things are making, cyber life, it's a bit more complicated. So both sides, I think virtually, we definitely realize a huge increase using COVID as a topic, and also causing a challenge with, the physical world.
Mm-hmm. Mirko, you want to add anything to that from your perspective?
Yeah, well, the area of payment, what we have seen, especially in some countries, is that COVID accelerated the transition to cashless. We still have a number of countries in Europe where a huge percentage of payment is done by cash. That is, in general, non-desirable situation because of the complexity of handling cash, the frauds, the change mistakes of the cashier, and so on. Now the COVID gave the extra benefit, especially with contactless payment, of not having to touch the same physical thing between cashier and customer, and that has been an accelerator, at least in the countries where cash is still dominant. Mm-hmm. So that's let's say, all the bad things that happen, if there is one positive thing, is the acceleration of cashless.
Yeah, that's definitely a trend that we've been seeing at an international level, and that is one of the trends that are going to stay after the pandemic. Somebody was asking Mirko if you could expand on seeing the fuel pump controller as a vulnerable point for attack.
Yeah, definitely. So what I was saying before is that one of the most dangerous attacks that can occur at a petrol station in terms of payment data is a skimming attack at the OPT. So we have seen different cases of these attacks during the past years. We have a number of countries in Europe where fully attended stations are quite popular, and these are sites that are almost never visited or very rarely visited by technical personnel that can inspect equipment, etc. So if an attacker can install a skimming device on a remote OPT or an unmanned location, that device can stay there maybe for days or for weeks before getting spotted. And in the meantime, card data can be stolen. Again, this is not a problem for the current technology of bank card payments, so chip cards are contactless, but it can be a problem for fuel cards, still today are mistyped based on most cases.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So many of the times when we've seen some retailers been suffering attacks, sometimes it wasn't so much depending on their systems or how strong they were, but on more, maybe you could say, simple things that just were overlooked. We saw at Kaspersky a couple of years ago, they did a study where they found that over 1,000 sites had been vulnerable to attacks because of a specific system. So Neil, what are the simple things that retailers can do to make sure they stay safer? When it comes to, it can be password management, as you mentioned, Wi-Fi before. So things that don't only depend on how strong your system is on the back end, but just things that they could do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, I think you're right. There are some simple things that we can do. So we need to go back to ensuring we've got firewalls installed and they're correctly configured. We need to ensure that devices are securely configured, and we've removed things like default admin passwords and default admin accounts. We need to look at access control and make sure that people have unique logins and look at your offboarding and your onboarding processes, so that when people leave your business, you're getting rid of their account on the day that they leave. And to make sure that you do your software updates. Okay, it's something that the industry goes on about all the time. And it sounds so simple, but it's not, because obviously we know that software updates breaks things and the like. So we need a process for that, and obviously make sure you've got malware protection as well. And then you can start adding in things like making sure your Wi-Fi is secured. Even better, if you're going to allow the public access to your Wi-Fi, completely separate it from your business systems. There should be no need for them two systems to talk to each other.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In this debate about security for a company like MOL, for example, in the case of Peter, there's definitely a debate between being stronger and being more digitalized and avoiding this kind of cyber attacks. And on the other end, you have from governments and especially the European Union, heavier and more intensified and demanding laws on data protection and basically anything protecting consumer data. So Peter, how do you see, how is it hard to manage yourself, navigate between those two waters?
Yeah,
the cybersecurity side?
Finding the balance obviously is very, very challenging and difficult. I think I agree with Neil with the, start with the assessment management and then risk management, because, risk management and prioritizing risk, either it's a regulatory risk like GDPR and data protection, or it's a real threat risk. I think at the end of the day, it's all a business. Business has to be aware, when they decide between pace, fast pace or proper implementation, they should be aware of the risk. And I think our job is definitely to have them to understand what risks they are facing, because in many cases they don't know basically that either it could bring a huge fine from regulatory, or it could be a huge data leakage, which is a reputational issue, or it's a real threat when personal data are stolen and being used for on the internet for various purposes, either using payments or others. So in all cases, basically, it could generate loss and even break the business model itself. So I think our job is definitely to have them to understand and mitigate as much as possible. So I think it should be hand in hand, with especially with the new ideas, how fast they are, because obviously they would like to be agile and would like to be first in the market and faster than the competition. But in other hand, obviously we have to take into account all the risks, not just the cyber risk, but nowadays it's getting to be the main risk actually for many new.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Peter. From the payment side, Mirko, how do you go about ensuring that you're in the laws of data protection, especially somewhere like the European Union?
Yeah, so as I said, the payment frameworks that are describing the security requirements of the payment systems are quite complex, and there are different frameworks around the world which are addressing different parts of payment infrastructure. So we have an international, global, I would say, framework which is called PCI, which is about the physical security of devices and the security of the networks and general security of data. That's one thing. Then we have additional regulatory frameworks applying to specific industry domains and specific transaction types. There are certification processes, there are local domestic schemes, which are also dictating in some cases additional security layers. So overall, the regulatory framework is very complex. I would say that in terms of trend, what we see as an emerging trend in fuel industry is the adoption of point-to-point encryption infrastructure. So there is a specific area of PCI called PCI P2P, point-to-point encryption, which aim is to ensure that the card data is never exposed in a, let's say, original way, nowhere in infrastructure. So the moment of the card read, the card reader is encrypting the card data, and the card data is decrypted only in a PCI secure environment, which means a centralized payment gateway. So regardless of the number of networks and layers this payment data is crossing, there is no meaningful information that can be extracted by an attacker. So that's let's say, a very valuable tool to increase the security of payment.
Mm-hmm. So from your perspective of IFSF, is that the kind of things that you're working on? Can you just maybe give us a little bit of insight onto what standards you're demanding?
Absolutely, yes. So what I was mentioning before is the general framework for payment industry overall, so no specific sector. Within the fuel retailing, IFSF is playing a major role in Europe, and let's say equivalent organization in North America, which is Connexus, is doing quite the same job. The two organizations are very closely aligned to provide specific standard frameworks for the industry in order to, let's say, put at disposal of the community of the industry the highest level of security in the protocols, also allowing for right level of interoperability, because the big challenge here is not only to provide the adequate level of security, but also to make sure that the equipment from various suppliers can interact each other in a natural way. So it's difficult, because obviously the easier interoperability, likely the less secure the environment. So it has to be found the right balance between how open the system is and how secure it is. And IFSF and Connexus are doing this job to put the industry players at the same level on a framework of protocols.
Mm-hmm. Neil, what are the that we haven't mentioned as an expert in cybersecurity? What would be your biggest fear as a retailer that could happen to you, and what challenges do you see that maybe not being covered right now?
I think if I was a retailer, then the loss of the credit card information is probably going to have the biggest impact on my business, because I'm going to have the data protection authorities coming down on you like a ton of bricks. So in the UK, that would be the Information Commissioner's Office, and the loss of that information is undoubtedly going to lead to a fine, unless you've really had processes in place and done everything possible to prevent that. Mm-hmm. So I think the regulatory element to it is the one that's going to impact the business the most. And I think once you start putting a cost against the potential fine, then you can start to look at where you can apply controls to really minimise the threats effectively.
Mm-hmm. Peter, you're obviously involved in a huge energy group that works in different sectors. From your experience, obviously, I would imagine that MOL receives cyber attacks in the midstream area and in downstream. Have you seen a large increase when it comes to retailing specifically over the last years, or is that still an area that's not as attacked as other ones?
Actually, what I realized, definitely what I said at the beginning, that we already, with the threat intel says as well, we already realized that there are targeted companies in the region, as well by targeted groups. So that's specific groups who are targeting specific business lines. So retail is amongst them. So like any other business, attackers are specializing to certain business, because in order to successfully create an attack, obviously you have to understand the business and you have to understand the components, and it has a learning curve. And there are groups who are specifically targeting retailers. I'm not necessarily saying that petrol stations are the most targeted. I don't think so. I think there are bigger fish in the pond right now than petrol stations. But I think it's gonna happen as well. I personally would expect more on industrial side, because disruption can cause huge problems, as we saw in many cases. So if they successfully stop a whole factory, then obviously, and if it's a ransom, for instance, then obviously really a big money. So I think the trend it's more like on the industrial side, what I've seen so far, but petrol stations are getting on the radar as well, especially with the new solutions.
Yeah, I think you're totally right there, Peter. As we've seen, when it comes to political cyber attacks, it's much more focused on the upstream sector, and this is a conversation that's having a lot more widespread in that part of the industry. where we can agree that probably wouldn't receive that many political cyber attacks when it comes to actual retailing of petrol stations. So we have a question for Mirko, I think. Are there more risks when it comes to RFID cards and mobile payments, or with chip cards and magnetic cards?
Yeah, a very good question. So again, that goes back to what we said before about the COVID. Due to the need of increasing the number of transactions that happen without contact, in many countries, the contactless payment limit has been increased. So we used to have the £20 or €25 limit for the tap and go transaction without typing PIN, etc. In several countries, that has been increased to 50, even above 50. Why is that? Because this number that was decided ahead of time was simply a risk mitigation thing. So nobody really knew how secure the contactless could have been, and therefore they put this risk mitigation limit at €25 or £20. Now, after many years and many billions of transactions, we can say that contactless is as secure as chip, or even more if you want. And therefore, we can comfortably raise the limit of expenditure without PIN and without any compromise on security. So that's still top-level security. And that's a good question. It's very relevant also for the COVID conversation we were having before. And if the trend continues like that, we can expect a further increase in this limit. In some parts of Southeast Asia, the limit is already around €100. And if it gets to that level, then we can say that the vast majority of B2C transactions that we have at petrol station could switch to contactless.
We have another question from Stefan Colbert saying, can a serial connection be attacked in order to get to a TCP or IP connection? Anybody want to jump on that one?
I can take that one.
All right, Neil?
I think the simple answer is yes. If you can plug into a serial port, then you pretty much can do what you want to do on the system. Whether that's going to give you a full network connection, i.e. a browser, remains to be seen. But a serial port is an often overlooked method of attacking the system. You obviously need physical access to the port in order to use it, however. So ensuring that you have secured the device that has a serial port on it, i.e. it's in a locked cabinet in a secure area, and also making sure that that device has its root password changed, that there's no default accounts on the machine that will let you get into it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Neil. And for Neil and Peter, you know, when we talk about if somebody actually has access to your network, we saw that in the case of INA, they couldn't print some invoices, they had issues with the loyalty scheme. Could it affect the supply chain, for example, and how could it affect it?
I mean, definitely it can affect the supply chain in many ways. One way is actually, you know, we are holding lots of information about the supply chain. So if it's leaked out or if data is stolen, it basically can be, you know, used against or partner even within or supply chain. Also, you know, usually the attacks are not happening when you realize that the attack is happening. It happens much earlier. It starts with a huge discovery on the network, including, you know, your supply chain network as well. So usually when you realize that there was an attack, it happens much earlier. We're really unlucky, and your systems were not so well designed, or the attack was really sophisticated. So I think it's definitely affect entire supply chain.
Mm-hmm. So we've seen that this somebody considered that the petrol stations are becoming a bit of a honeypot for hackers. We're still to see if that is the case. And this is a question to the three of you. Do you expect to see a far increase in the number of attacks in the coming years? Is this something that the industry seriously has to consider?
I will start with that. I think if the petrol stations are staying on the low secure level, as many of them, not necessary for us, but I think that's kind of the industry standard, especially for the low players. Obviously, it could be a playground, especially learning, you know, how those petrol stations are set up, and you know, before you go to the big ones, you start studying the small ones, which you can easily hack, then definitely, and also because things are getting centralized. You know, mostly the you know, the critical information and the critical data is somewhere centrally, and the hackers would like to go as deep as they could. Usually, they start with the weakest link, and if they think that the petrol station are the weakest link, that they try to break into your network and even into your data center via the weakest link, because, you know, as I said at the beginning, that the petrol station are now connected usually, then in that case, if it's not properly secured, there's no, you know, the security measures are not there, then they can use it for lateral attacks, starting from petrol station, going into as far as your domain admin, right? So I think it's definitely one thing which we have to look into.
Mm-hmm. Neil or Mirko, you want to add anything to that?
I would just agree with Peter that the hacker will always take the easiest route in, and the more security you put around the centralized systems, then and if you don't spend the money on the outside the perimeter of the network, if you like, then they will take the easy route in, and whether that's to get access into your data center or to use it as a playground, as Peter suggested, it's not going to end well either way.
Mm-hmm. Mirko?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, we have seen also for other industries that it's relatively easier to attack, let's say, the peripheral of the infrastructure rather than the center of the infrastructure. So we have seen in the past high-profile attacks on restaurant chains, etc. These systems are by nature exposed because there is a guy called maintenance worker which is getting their plugging USB sticks in, etc. So it's not that difficult to get access to these machines, and if the level of protection is not adequate, that's definitely a relatively easier target rather than drilling the entire central infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. So obviously, for a company like MOL, in the case of Peter, it's probably easier because they have one structure and they can have one policy. But for a smaller to medium retailer with from 10 to 100 sites, I guess the question of security may not be so important, or they wouldn't see it as important. I remember talking to Keith, Neil's colleague, and he was saying until something really bad happens, they're probably not going to wake up, those smaller, medium players. So, you know, Neil and Mirko, how can we talk to those people and convince them to kind of like, you know, get up to date with their technology?
I think it's about education. You know, we need to be educating these people, letting them see what can happen, and using test case scenarios where the worst has happened, just to kind of indicate the potential attacks that are out there, and that they don't all happen to the big multinational companies. And in actual fact, most credit card crime is actually done at the smaller business level.
So somebody's asking, how much of the total payments volume would be sensible percentage of investment for cybersecurity measures? Mirko?
That's a very good one. So what I can say is that in principle, and probably the colleagues connected, especially Peter, can confirm that putting together a payment system for a distributed retail network of petrol stations is something very complex. So what normally happens, and it's not optimal for sure, is that you make a big investment, you put your infrastructure into a compliance state as of now, then you tend to forget about it. Some years pass, and then the components of your infrastructure become increasingly obsolescent, and then it's time to do another big investment to put the stuff again on a compliant level. So it goes all up and down like spikes. So that's not optimal, because for a long time the network is not in an optimal state, and it's not optimal even from a budgeting perspective, because you have some peak years and some very flat years. What's the recommendation is that, as Neil said before, you start from the easy thing, so recurring software upgrades on all equipments. That's a simple thing that doesn't necessarily cost a fortune, and that improves already significantly the level of protection. Plus, instead of waiting for all the equipments to have an expired certificate, if the retailers start to think about replacing a certain amount of them every year in order to have a kind of a flat investment over time and get an average level of readiness which is higher over time. So that's something that not many companies are doing, but definitely a recommendation we would give.
Peter, we have a question for you, and somebody's wondering what specific measures has MOL taken recently to prevent the cyber attacks, and if you can let us know, I would imagine you prefer maybe not to mention it, how many attacks have you received in the last months?
So obviously I cannot disclose how many attacks we are facing. I can disclose that we faced a huge cyber attack in February and continue in March, which we believe that was a targeted attack. And what security measures we are putting in place? I mean, also I cannot disclose everything, obviously. Awareness is definitely number one on my topic as well. You know, we are doing lots of things for awareness, and we would like to increase that as well. We still see that email is one of the biggest delivery method of any malicious code into companies. So we are focusing lots on emails. Sometimes I believe it's unbelievable how much we are spending to protect us from emails. Actually, much more than for the whole emailing infrastructure itself, which is kind of weird. We are working really hard on network segregation. Many of us mentioned this, you know, segregating different type of networks, like retail network, or even within retail. We are trying, you know, zoning, try to separate different systems. They, you know, on network-based level, they're not able to talk to each other. They work on a higher level of communication. So, you know, many things. I can't really count all, but you know, every year we are trying to fix some gaps, and obviously focusing also on new threats, because what haven't been really mentioned so far, but the threats are getting much more sophisticated. So not just what Mirko mentioned, that you know the life cycle is a problem, that you have the, you know, devices getting aged and you know, not really updated, but also the attacks are getting sophisticated. So once you are ready with something, actually it's already obsolete, and that's, I think, what it makes it very difficult.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and we much appreciate the insight you can provide from MOL, and we don't want to put you in a difficult spot. So we have another question, which actually goes into an interesting debate that I wanted to leave for the end, which I guess is more, the question is more towards Mirko, but I want to then get everyone to comment on it, which is if we'll see fingerprint or face recognition as possible payment methods at OBTs. And then this opens another question, which is when it comes to data protection and those laws, is that a block for technologies like facial recognition, and how a company is going to navigate that debate as well, where obviously there is some hurdles to be jumped. So you can start, Mirko, and then maybe we can get some comments from Neil and Peter.
So obviously we're talking about things which have been discussed by the industry for the last 20 years. I think the first conference on biometrics and security, which I attended, was in 1999 in Berlin. It took forever because it got to a maturity state, but clearly, definitely, in the last years, the Face ID of Apple or the Touch ID, the fingerprint, etc., became widely accepted identification method used also for payments. So at the moment, the uptake of this technology is significant. So it's still very much proprietary because they rely on specific stacks provided by specific vendors. But definitely there is a trend, and we can assume that in the future more biometric identification system will be available, even at the OPT, like the question was asking. Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm. And in this debate between new technologies and data protection, where how do you see that developing, Neil or Peter?
I can take this. So obviously, the technology is usually much faster, always faster than the regulatory environment. And there is technology, and there is business, and there is regulatory environment. That's what I see in this order. So technology is usually much earlier ready, and then business would like to adopt, faster, but there is usually a regulatory environment which makes it a bit more difficult. And then obviously somewhere between cybersecurity departments are there as well, and try to avoid some obviously data loss or any credential issue. So definitely that's something which we cannot avoid. I think it's coming because again, if you are not doing first, then it makes you in a difficult place in the business. So you have to make sure that you support business, but in other hand, you have to comply with regulatory environment and also mitigate the risk of cyber.
Mm-hmm. So I think we're reaching the end of the session. Neil, any last thoughts on how retailers should go about ensuring the stations are as safe as possible, as well as the supply chains and the day-to-day business?
I think the simple solution is you need to be taking advice from the specialists. Get someone in who knows what they're doing and to advise you correctly. Once you've been advised, you then get to make the decisions on what to protect, how to protect it, and take it from there.
Mirko, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I would just repeat what Neil was saying before. The easiest and quick win is the software upgrades. So implement, if they don't have yet a solid software upgrade policy, and upgrade the devices twice per year, 3-4 times per year, even if no need. So even if there is no specific business requirement or anything to fix. So sometimes they say if it's not broken, don't fix it. In this case, it's better to fix it even if it's not broken.
Mm-hmm. Peter, from you?
I think one step closer to the best protection. Obviously, it's much better than known steps. So I think even if somebody obviously from budget point of view or from other point of view is not able to do the similar level, at least they have to look into the problem and they have to be aware that there is a risk. I think that's identifying the risk, I think, don't take that much money.
Okay, thank you. So that's the end of this session. I want to thank the three of you, Peter, Neil, and Mirko, for participating. It's been great. I want to apologize to some of the people watching. I know there were some issues with the sound. We'll be uploading the video tomorrow, so we can all share it to our viewers and probably to your followers from your companies. This is definitely a major debate that in the case of MOL, which is such a big company, has been seriously looked at, but there's definitely a number of smaller and medium retailers which need to get up to date with their safety and the technology at their sites to make sure they don't run into any trouble. So hopefully this will help some people in the debate, and we'll continue with the sessions. And yeah, thank you very much to the three of you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.